Hi, this is Erik with another Science Quest. Today we're going to interview Adam Hepburn. He's a PhD candidate in glaciology at Aberystwyth University in Wales. He's part of the Geography and Earth Sciences department. Hi Adam, how are you?
Hi, no, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. How's the weather there? The weather is...
Very well.
So, you're a glaciologist. Could you explain to the kids what a glaciologist studies?
So I'm a glaciologist, yeah. I'm interested in sort of ice sheets and glaciers, which are big masses of ice that at the moment are commonly found towards the poles on the Earth, and also in high mountains, but in the past were much more extensive. In particular, I'm interested in glaciers on Mars.
Right.
So I do some work on Earth-based glaciers, but most of my work concerns glaciers on Mars, yeah.
So glaciologists, just like any other field of science, can include glaciers on Earth and glaciers on other planets, obviously, like you're saying. So it's a field that you can go in different directions, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, glaciology is a really broad field. You can sort of study the very small, so sort of how ice crystals and how snowfall works, to the very large and how entire landscapes and continents, how their topography is formed by glaciers. There's a whole broad range of things you can do.
When you got started, how did you focus on glaciology? Did you go on your undergraduate towards earth sciences, or how did you get there to glaciology?
So I started in geography. I was broadly interested in how the Earth worked. I'd never really studied glaciers, but at the university I went to in Sheffield, the department is heavily focused on glaciers. And so I sort of got a lot of influence from professors and lecturers who research glaciers, and found it to be a really interesting subject and something I really enjoyed. So that pushed me down that path. And then I did my master's degree specifically in glaciology. And now I'm doing my PhD in glaciology too.
So Adam, what is a normal day for you like in your research?
So most of my research is computer-based. I'm primarily interested in studying glaciers from space. Obviously we can't go to Mars, so the best I can do is work with imagery and some other forms of data that NASA collect from a series of satellites, and the European Space Agency as well. So most of my work is, in fact all of my work is computer-based. So this can involve lots of different things. Sometimes I'm using mathematical models to sort of understand how glaciers flow and move over time. Sometimes it's as simple as mapping, looking at an image and trying to work out what I can see in the landscape, what might have caused it, the sequence of events that might have caused it, and how this may have changed over time. And then obviously there's writing about this, there's trying to talk to people online about this, there's all sorts of work. And I've also been really fortunate to be involved with other people's work in glaciology, using some of the skills I've got to help them with their fieldwork, and help them with their work to do Earth-based glaciology as well.
So are you under a lead researcher like at your university?
Yeah, so I've got 3 supervisors. One's in Sheffield and 2 are here in Aberystwyth, and they're all rather involved in research groups to do with glaciology. So yeah, no, I do study under 1 professor and 2 lecturers.
Could you maybe explain to the kids a little bit how that works? Because I think it's kind of interesting. When you of course get accepted to the program and you get put into this research group, right, to become a PhD candidate, but it's almost like you're getting hired for it, really, right, by the lead researcher, right?
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit about how that works, that whole process?
So there's broadly 2 ways of doing a PhD. Either, and this is what I've done, you sort of propose an area of study that really interests you. In my case, it was glaciers on Mars. You propose some questions, and you sort of approach a few professors, a few lecturers, and see if they'd be interested in your work and working with you to sort of do a PhD project. Because obviously these professors have spent years studying certain things and have skills that they can share with you, and they can guide you, and they can help you develop your own skills. So that's one way of doing a PhD, is sort of proposing your own work. Or what often will happen is a professor or somebody will advertise a project that they want to do, so something they're really interested in, and they'll solicit applications to do that themselves. So people will apply to do that project, and that's in much more like a job interview, and the supervisor is looking for someone who they're going to work well with.
and then of course you get published, which is important, and eventually you do your thesis, and that's a whole thesis argument, right? It's called thesis argument or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, different things.
So more specifically, I'm interested in the timing of Martian glaciers. So their sort of history and how Mars's climate has changed over the last few million years. So that's my overall thesis, is coming at this question from lots of different angles, hopefully publishing a few papers along the way and sticking them all together in one big thesis.
Well, now that we're talking about Martian glaciers, could you maybe explain a little bit about the science now that's involved in Martian glaciers? What are researchers now looking at, for example, in Martian glaciers? Or are they obviously they're trying to see when they all? Well, I guess explain what the Martian glaciers are like first, because that kids may not even understand what that is, you know.
So since around the 1970s, we've known that there's these features on Mars that look like big flowing features. So imagine if you poured honey on a landscape, you'd see patterns of flow and different sort of arrangements. And more recently, as we've got more and more data and more insight, we've begun to realize that in many ways the glaciers on Mars are very similar to the glaciers we see on Earth. They're composed primarily of water ice, so the stuff that forms from snowfall. And there's a huge ice cap on the North Pole of Mars that looks very similar to Antarctica, with a large ice sheet that's up to 3 kilometers thick in places, with lots of internal layers and possibly even water at its bed, which is amazing to think about.
Is all the atmosphere encapsulated in the glaciers now in Mars, or is mostly, or have they discovered something new? I'm not sure of the current.
So at the moment, Mars is it's a really dry, sort of deserty planet. There's very thin atmosphere. It doesn't look like much is happening, but you've got these glaciers which point to something having happened in the past. In order to get these glaciers, you needed snowfall, you needed periods of prolonged conditions similar to what we might observe on Mars, or might observe on Earth rather. So the presence of glaciers, and the reason they're so interesting, is they point to a really different Mars in the not so distant past, a Mars that might have looked very similar to Earth and might have hosted life even, rather.
So what is interesting is that by looking at Mars, we can kind of see the future possibly of Earth, or also the past possibly of things that have happened by looking at other planets, almost like a comparison, right?
Yeah, and one really rich sort of area of study is comparing landforms and landscapes on Earth that we don't know very much about, and looking for analogues on Mars and see if we can understand how they each formed and what we can learn from different landscapes between the planets.
I think it's really fascinating. So then my last question is, thank you very much for telling us a little bit about glaciers on Mars. It's very, very interesting, and it's very timely right now, considering what's going on Earth with the receding of the glaciers and things like that on Earth. I think it's a very timely field that kids, you should consider going into it, because it's going to be a biggie in the future.
Absolutely.
But yeah, what advice would you give a kid interested in becoming a glaciologist?
I think advice I'd give to somebody interested in becoming a glaciologist, and perhaps a scientist in more general terms, is find something that really interests you. As I said at the start, glaciology is a really broad field, with lots of intersections with other studies and other sort of sciences. And I think everyone has something to contribute to glaciology and science more generally. So if you can find a topic that really interests you and motivates you, it's much easier to do the work and sort of motivate yourself to work through problems and ask the right sort of questions. And I think that would be my advice, is find something you really enjoy. It's simple advice, but I think it's pretty much the only advice I've followed, and I'm doing it right.
Every scientist says the same thing, kids. If you haven't noticed, you have to be curious in something, you have to stay curious, and you should do something that really interests you, so that you always ask questions. I mean, that's true of any job, but especially in sciences, where the question is very important, Yeah,
the question is really important.
Yes, the question. So thank you, Adam, for telling us a little bit about Martian glaciers and glaciology in general. And thank you, and I wish you the best in your endeavors in the future. And I should let kids know that if you have any questions, please forward them to me at reference@elwoodlibrary.org, and I'll forward them to Adam, who will try to answer your very complicated questions. You never know. So thank you, Adam.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.